Okay, it looks like we're live. So welcome to the Nordic Casks by Berry Brothers and Rudd. My name is Johnny McMillan, and I'm one of the spirits buyers at Berry Brothers. I think there are a few other people waiting in the background. If they could mute, that would be great, please. Yeah, I'm one of the spirits buyers at Berry Brothers and Rudd. So it's my job to spend Berry Brothers' hard-earned cash on casks of whiskey. And undoubtedly, it's a great thing to rake the warehouses of Scotland, to lay down old glories to bottle in the decades to come. But my favourite part of the job, definitely, is speaking directly to new wave distillers. And the distillers that I'm interested in talking to are those that are making characterful distillate. And, to me, there is no nobler goal of a distiller than to make something with its own DNA, its own personality. And I think this moment in time really is a great moment for distilling. I see all over the world a movement towards people using more interesting raw materials, different barley varieties, different grains. Distillers are interested in provenance. They're interested in producing something with a sense of place. Certainly respectful of tradition, but very much ploughing their own furrow. I'm pleased to say that we're seeing that in Scotland. I visited Isle of Raasay earlier this year, who I think are really a great example of that. And also the Irish pot still movement. I had a trip over to Ireland, and I think that just completely kind of captures that zeitgeist. America as well, grain to glass, field to glass distillers, some amazing quality American single malt out there. But for me, if you want to look at a real kind of hotbed of dynamic distilling, look no further than the Nordics. Last year, I was really proud of the Nordic casks that we released, and I had a lot of good feedback, some really nice reviews, people who knew these distilleries and were interested to see Berry Brothers bottle them, and also people that had never really considered the Nordics as a region before. And I'm pleased to say this year we have another 4 wonderful idiosyncratic distilleries bottled by Berry Brothers in the Nordic casks. The whiskies we'll taste tonight in many ways kind of summarize the Nordic region, in that they all come from very different backgrounds, and indeed they take very different approaches, but they all share that common goal of producing characterful distillate. Here are the bottles here tonight. First, we're going to go to Denmark, and we're going to chat to Stauning. Stauning, although it's one of the biggest brands in the Nordics now, it was started by 9 pals on the west coast of Denmark. They make very, very traditional whiskey, direct fire, floor malting. Then we're going to go to Finland. We're going to chat to Teerenpeli. Teerenpeli come from a completely different background. They have a brewery, on-trade sites. And then in the middle, we're going to have a little break, and we're going to try the first ever cross-Nordic blended malt, which I'm very excited about. So we'll hear more about that. And then we'll go back to Denmark, and we'll go to two, which I think is kind of arguably the most romantic of distillers. Their approach is more like a kind of winemaker, very interested in terroir and farming, malting, almost as much as a fermentation distillation side. And last, but by no means least, we'll go to Sweden and chat to Smøgen, who are the kind of cult figures of the Nordic series, I think. Very much inspired by the great whiskies of the west coast of Scotland, but certainly with their own stamp on things. And then at the end, we'll bring all the distillers back on screen, and we'll have a little Q&A. So if you've got any questions, absolutely, pop them in the chat throughout, and you can also ask them at the end. The bottles are also for sale as well, importantly. So if you do fancy a bottle, you can go to bbr.com, or also our very good friends at Abbey Whiskey. Bottles are now for sale, so please do. Don't listen to anything I'm saying. Just go and buy them immediately so we can repeat this in future years, please. Also, I'd like to say a big thank you to my very hardworking and diligent colleague, Alex Parsons, who is only in his 2nd week with Berry Brothers, but he's very unglamorously stuck in the office, manning this tasting in the back end of things. So please spare a thought for Alex when you're enjoying these drams. However, without further ado, we shall move on with the tasting. Now, I am acutely aware that I know very little about anything, but least of all Nordic whiskey. So I have recruited two of my erudite Nordic pals to join me in this tasting and talk through the distillers with me. So later on, as you can see a little sneak preview, we're going to be joined by Ingvar Ronde of the Malt Whisky Yearbook. Apologies for the massively incorrect pronunciation of everyone's name. But first, I'd like to bring on screen Moa Nilsson, who writes under the alias Swedish Whiskey Girl. Alex, it appears that everyone's on screen. I don't know if this is intentional. There we go. How you doing, Moa? Are you well?
Yes, I'm very well. Thank you for having me on.
Good. No, not at all. Are you in Sweden just now? Is this your little Swedish bothy?
It's not. I'm in Edinburgh. I've lived here for the past, is it 7 years now? But I'm originally from Sweden, so I was born and raised there.
You're doing sort of missionary work over here and spreading the word of Nordic whiskey and cinnamon buns and stuff.
Exactly. I actually did tasting once, pairing cinnamon buns to whiskey, so they are
really? Did that
great
work?
match. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm willing to try that. Certainly, cardamom buns as well was my main memory of Stockholm. It was fantastic. But tell me, so you're obviously a whiskey nerd as well as being Swedish. When did you kind of first become aware of Nordic whiskey?
Well, so I got into whiskey about 4 years ago now, and I'm now working on the kind of content creator, writing, spirit judging kind of side of things. So when I started out, I worked in Scotch Whisky Experience, and then we actually got visited at the distillery by Angela Dorazio, who was the chief nose officer, I think was her official title, for Mackmyra. And being Swedish, I of course got a really fascinated that Sweden was making whiskey, and after that I'm just have such a love for everything Nordic, and I don't know if it's just that I miss home so much, but yeah, I got really into it and started researching Finnish whiskey, Danish whiskey, and now stretching across to Icelandic whiskey as well.
Indeed. And what makes Nordic whiskey stand out to you?
I think because they are their own thing. They don't try to be Scotch whiskey. They don't try to be Irish whiskey. They don't try to be bourbon. No matter if they're distilling rye or barley or any other grain variety, it's almost like they have the cultural aspect of being your own country and then taking that culture and your tastes and what you have in your country and making whiskey that way. You don't try to imitate anyone else. You just look to learn elsewhere, of course. But then you make it your own.
No, I totally agree. I think that's kind of what I like about the region is that the distilleries are mainly started by people that, have a real love for whiskey and have kind of, spent the first part of their working lives buying bottles and loving bottles. But, the way they're making it, it's not like trying to emulate Scotch or Japanese or American or whatever. It's just kind of drawing inspiration. We seem to have lost everyone else on the screen.
I'm still
hello, good. Okay, wonderful. So we're going to bring on the first distiller. First, we would like to welcome the frankly epically named Hans Martin Hansgaard. I mean, that is the best name in Denmark, surely.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
No, not at all. Really, very, very happy to bottle the Stauning. So the Stauning that we have bottled for everyone, hopefully everyone's got their sample packs and are tasting along tonight. The Stauning is a 2017 Stauning rye. It was matured in a virgin American oak cask for the first part of its life, and then it was given the last year of its life in a Muscatel hogshead, bottled at 58.9% alcohol. So Hans, tell us about Stauning.
Yeah, Stauning. It's the oldest whiskey distillery in Denmark. We started in 2005, kind of very, very small. It was a hobby project. There was no one making whiskey in Denmark at that time. So we thought, because we had all these great ingredients for whiskey, the pure water we have in Denmark, and also the barley, the rye, the grains that grow here, it's really fit for making whiskey. And we got together 9 friends, and you're showing them on the screen now. These are the 9 founders of Stauning whiskey. Mm-hmm. I will just quickly run through them. There's the doctor, Martin. There's Mogens, the butcher. There's a helicopter pilot. There's Jesper. Then there's me. I'm a teacher. Then there's Rasmus, who's engineer, Simon, engineer, Lasse, engineer, and Alex, engineer, and then Henning, who is a chef. So we sat down in 2005 and discussed whether we could make whiskey in Denmark, and agreed on that it would definitely be possible. So we raised some money for this. Our funding capital was around 1,500 euros. And for those money, we each of us, I should say, we bought in 1,500 euros. And for those money, we got some pot stills, and we rebuilt an old butchery in the back of Mogens' house. We rebuilt that into the first purpose-built, you could say, whiskey improvised distillery here. So and then we started thinking about, okay, how do we want to make our whiskey? The philosophy behind Stauning whiskey. And we knew that we only wanted to use local raw materials. So we would source everything from the region around Stauning. And I should say Stauning is it's a small village in the west coast of Denmark, very close to the North Sea. And it's farmland, so we basically have everything we need for proper whiskey making. So we sourced, the philosophy is to source everything from around the improvised distillery we built there. We also wanted to do everything ourselves, so an all in-house production. So from floor malting to mashing, fermenting, kilning, distilling, maturation and bottling, everything should be in-house. And we also sought out what we thought would be the best methods, which was floor malting and pot still distillation, and also you mentioned it earlier, the direct fire distillation. And all these methods we still hang on to even to this day, even though we've grown quite a bit over the years.
I think that must be the best 1,500 euros anyone's ever spent. I mean, you're lucky if you can get a good bottle of whiskey for 1,500 euros these days. I mean, that's that's incredible to be able to fund a distillery like that. I'm exceptionally envious. Tell me, when it comes to the rye, I mean, was that something you sort of planned to do from the outset, or?
It wasn't actually. It was a very different time back then, and it's 17 years ago. And we thought we were going to be kind of the Danish version of Ardbeg. We thought, okay, we are on the west coast of Denmark. We should do peated single malt, kind of like what they do on Islay. So we thought this would be our house style, and we would maybe only make one type of spirit. But being very curious, and we soon left that idea and started distilling other things. And we had a great love for rye whiskey. Enjoyed American rye whiskeys and Canadian rye whiskeys. And so we soon realized we need to do both smoked single malts, unsmoked single malts, and rye whiskeys. And now we also make a smoked rye whiskey, which hasn't been released yet, but it's coming.
I've tried the smoked rye from Kiro, and it's super good.
Yeah.
So tell me, the rye whiskey in the Nordics, and I'm kind of thinking of yourselves, Kiro, Helsinki as examples. It's quite a different style of rye to what people are maybe used to. What people are maybe used to in America. Is that kind of a purposeful choice, or how it's turned out?
Yeah, for us, we just thought it would be very fitting to make a rye whiskey in Denmark. Some of you may know that rye bread is kind of the national food of Denmark. Most Danes will eat rye bread almost every day, with either as open sandwiches, the smørbrød, which you might know, and with different.
My partner is Danish, and I've earned her love by learning to make genuine. I think you could pronounce it råbolle. But yeah, I'm well familiar with your rye bread.
Exactly, yeah. So we just thought, since we have some very good climate for growing rye in Denmark, and we have this affection for rye bread in Denmark, we wanted to make our rye whiskey kind of a tribute to the tradition of rye bread in Denmark. and also in the booklet you included here, it's very fitting that you have the pieces of rye bread in the tasting notes, because it's really our tribute to Danish rye bread.
Hans, would you say there's any particular difficulties with distilling or mashing rye?
Oh, there is. We have had a lot of problems in the distillery. We have gone through different chapters in Stauning. Started out very small, as I said, in the butchery. In 2009, we moved to a farm. So 4 years later, we set up a farmhouse and went from a production of 200 liters per year to a production of 6,000 liters per year. So not a lot, but still it was for us felt like a big move, so we have had a lot of challenges with rye. It just acts very different to barley. It almost acts like oats, and it clogs up very easily, and we have had to invent many different ways of especially draining the mash after and getting the water out of the mash. It's really difficult. So we have invented quite a bit of machines to do this. It's very difficult to work with.
Yeah,
what do you think of this whiskey, Mo?
Oh, I really like it. I was just having a little nose of it. And it does have such a lovely, sweet, almost velvety mouthfeel. And then I can't remember who said it earlier, but I think it was Ingvar who was mentioning how it has this kind of sweeter, almost desserty style, but mixing in with a nice wood character, which at no point takes over, which I really enjoy.
Yeah, I really agree. In some of the questions I had was, is there a particular Nordic type of flavor to our rye whiskies here? And I think they come out quite differently because the American ryes, they're often very spicy, very fiery, and very sharp in their flavor. But from my own perspective, Stauning rye is something I would always, if someone comes to me and at a whiskey trade show, for example, and says, I'm not really into whiskey or doing a barrel top or something at a shop, I would always start with serving them our rye whiskey, because it is very velvety. It is easy to drink, very pleasant for even non-whiskey drinkers to have this rye.
For sure. And how has it, how would you say the kind of standard Danish whiskey drinker, what are they like? What's their taste? And how have they welcomed or not welcomed, I don't know, your whiskey?
Oh, very well. We've been very well received in Denmark. I think, of course, being the first among the first whiskey to release rye whiskey bottles in Denmark, we have a standout name as the go-to Danish whiskey, and we are very well known in Denmark. And I also feel that there are different approaches to whiskey. If you look around Europe, for example, different countries have different preferences. In Germany, I would say they're very focused on single malt, whereas in Denmark we are more open to rye whiskey, for example, as a style. So we are not as conservative as they would be in Germany, for example, generally speaking.
Interesting.
Do you consider yourself a Danish whiskey, or do you consider yourself a Nordic whiskey or a European whiskey, or are you just Stauning, or Stauning rather? Again, my pronunciation.
As you said in your introduction to today's tasting, whiskey is really at the most interesting when you can taste where it comes from. So I feel that there's really a need for whiskey from all over the world. So we consider us a new world whiskey, a world whiskey that is an addition to the traditional whiskey making countries. Because we have this focus on using local raw materials, so a Stauning should taste of nothing else but a Stauning, and that's why we think it's a contribution to the world of whiskies. So it is, of course, we are our own whiskey, but I think we belong to a region that is the Nordic region. That would make sense. And I think Klaus, I can see Klaus is in the chat. I think you would agree with that.
Yeah, I was also seeing there's a lot of familiar faces in the chat. So if someone's here, I see that there's already some support for Stauning, but would love to hear where everyone's from. So please let us know in the chat. And I've also heard so much support for Stauning. So it's lovely to be able to try in this way from Berry Brothers and Rod as well.
The distillery looks absolutely beautiful as well. I mean, for new distilleries, it's often quite difficult to be a kind of modern new build and also kind of look nice. But the way Stauning's built with the kind of arched roofs in the row, it's a really, really beautiful distillery.
Thank you so much.
I was trying to come for the World Whisky Forum this year, but I couldn't quite get Berry Brothers to pay for my ticket. But I do plan to go next year. It's in Japan, so joke's on them.
Very welcome. Just let me know.
Yeah, well, my kids are also keen to come to Legoland, which is nearby. So, anyway, but thank you, Hans. I think that whiskey is tremendous. I notice my friend Lee Connors, distilled consultant, mentioned a note of OTA blackcurrant bubblegum, which I don't think I'd really kind of noticed that. It's like blackcurrant leaf.
It's actually a note we often call out ourselves. We want this kind of bubblegum candy flavor in our whiskies. It really is typical for Stauning whiskies.
It's a really, really beautiful dram, and I think for me, Nordic rye is phenomenal whiskey. It's something I hadn't really tasted before a couple of years ago, and it's incredible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you much for your time, Hans. Please, please hang about for the Q&A at the end.
Sure.
But lots of support coming through. So thank you very much, Hans. Happy with that dram, Moa?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to continue to sip it.
I know. Yeah, I'm gonna leave my drams for the end, I think, and sort of come back to them with a quiet moment. But next up, we're gonna go to Finland, and we're going to talk to one of the oldest Nordic distilleries, Teerenpeli, founded in 2002. And we should have Jussi from Teerenpeli. Jussi, are you there?
Yeah, hello everybody. Here I am.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you doing? Are you well?
Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Good stuff. So let me just tell you a little about or tell everyone about the Teerenpeli we have bottled. So this is a 2013 Teerenpeli, which I think speaks a bit to the Nordic region, that there's kind of properly mature whiskey coming out of there. So 2013, this is an Oloroso hogshead bottled at 59.9. And I just think it's glorious. Certainly it's wood driven, but it just, it is just like sheer honeyed Oloroso. Tell us a bit about Teerenpeli, please.
Yeah, well, we are a family-owned company. Started 94 with a restaurant business, and then the next year we start making our own beer in the back room of our restaurant. And our boiling kettle was about 60 liter.
Legally?
Yeah, today it's 3,000 liter per batch, but since then it was 60 liter. So started really small. We have started making whiskey 2002, and we are making traditional single malt whiskey. And actually, the next Friday is our birthday. We are turning 20 years old, like the sign says.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
Amazing. Congratulations.
Yeah, it's 20 years of from the first spirit. And actually, we have in our old visitor center, we have a small batch of the first spirit ever come from our stills. Here in the picture is our new distillery. This we have built in 2015, because the old Teerenpeli distillery was in the basement of the building in center of Lahti, and there was start to be really crowded and we need more space. And of course, we want to make a little bit more of new spirit, and this year we are producing somewhere around 100,000 liters of new spirit in our our barrels.
Mm.
We also have our renewable energy power plant here in our new distillery, so we can use only that for the power that we are running for our stills and of course the brewery.
And where
How
does
did you?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, well, you go.
Oh, just was gonna ask where the name Teerenpeli comes from. Does it mean anything in Finnish?
Yeah, Teerenpeli. It's Teeri is one type of grouse, the bird. And actually, in my shirt, we have this logo here for the bird.
I was going to ask, is that a grouse?
And Teerenpeli in Finnish language means the mating game of the bird, or this grouse. And we have turned it into this kind of thing that when you see the pretty girl in a bar and you're having a little bit eye contact, that's in Finnish language Teerenpeli.
Oh, I see, it's a little bit flirty.
Yeah. Teerenpeli means this good feeling when you're having really nice evening and
I know the Finnish have a lot of good words for having a good time.
Yeah. So there, and actually our owner Anssi's wife has invented his name Teerenpeli, and it was our first restaurant name, and now it's our company name, and of course the distiller's name.
Brilliant.
So tell me, you started off, or at least the sort of second stage of your business was brewing, and brewing is obviously kind of half of the battle in making good whiskey. If you make good wash, you distill good whiskey. Has brewing, the approach in brewing, kind of informed your approach to distilling?
Yeah, of course we have some knowledge about malt, and because we are located in Lahti, we have this company called Viking Malt who is making over 100 years of barley malt and for the brewing, and so it was easy to start just seeing what else you can do when you're making beer, what else you can do from the barley malt. And well, there was all kinds of hard alcohols, like in Finland people really like to drink this clear alcohol, vodka or other things. And well, our owner Anssi thinking what maybe we have a little bit more challenge and maybe turn it for maturated spirits, and it was easy that way to turn the beer to whiskey.
What do you think of this whiskey, Moa?
I was just having my first sip, but on the nose, it's just so intriguing on the nose. It actually made me think of, I don't know if this is a thing in Britain, but when you put together a gingerbread house, you have to melt the sugar to use it as glue for the different parts. And that kind of melting sugar is what I got straight away on the nose. So very kind of nostalgic for me. And then on the palate, it's quite powerful, but still quite sweet. And I think that cask influence comes through in a really kind of, what's the word? It's quite rich, but quite chewy as well.
Yeah, I think the sherry cask has turned our new spirit quite nicely for this whiskey.
I think I'm just rereading my tasting notes here. I've written a rich aroma of dates, barbecue sauce, and honeyed gingerbread. I'm quite proud of that. It's a nice. I mean, it's just it's what I like about good sherry casks is there is that kind of like meaty sweetness, which I guess is kind of like barbecue sauce, almost like ribs. And it's the kind of thing that I think this is exactly the kind of whiskey. If someone's saying to you, oh, I only drink Scotch whiskey. I like, Aberlour. If you gave them this whiskey, it would just blow their mind. It's just an incredible, it's exactly the kind of distillate that works well with a big, heavy sherry cask.
Yeah, it feels like a very kind of sherried, heavy character without necessarily taking over the whiskey. I still think you get the spirit underneath it. Instead of having, sometimes I feel like sherried whiskeys can tend to have a bit more, too much wood or tannins in them. But I really like how the balance with the fruitiness of the sherry cask also comes out in this.
No, I agree. It's got beautiful balance. Tell me, you see, I think if someone asked me to describe each of the Nordic countries in terms of their whiskey production, I think I could do it fairly well. But when it comes to Finland, I think Finland is quite tricky because, there are a couple of rye producers, malt producers, and there's even I recently tasted Valamo, which is the monastery whiskey made in Finland. How would you describe the Finnish whiskey scene, and in terms of production, and what's the Finnish whiskey drinker looking for?
Well, I think we are much of following the world. There's lots of people who are looking for different kinds of malts, and that's why we have so different kinds of distillers also in Finland. Well, because we are one of the oldest distillery, and we are following the traditional type of making whiskey. Maybe we could be like granddads of Finnish whiskey. But well, Finland has quite a vivid whiskey scene, and there's lots of different kinds of drinkers. So that's I think that's one kind of richness, that we have totally different kinds of producers also.
Would you say that the Finnish people are very accepting and welcoming of Finnish whiskey? I know in Sweden, like people like my dad, we're very hesitant towards Swedish whiskey, but I think they're coming around now. So what are the Finnish drinkers like?
Yeah, well, we have teach 20 years of Finnish people to change the cognac on whiskey or their vodka on whiskey. So it's still we have quite long way to go, but
we're getting there.
We are getting there, and I think we are much of following Sweden, because in Sweden the whiskey scene is totally different than in Finland. But well, Sweden has always been some kind of big brother for Finnish whiskey scene, and we are looking much of what they have and following that kind of scene.
I would challenge anyone to taste that and tell me they didn't like it. I just think it's wonderful whiskey. It's super good. So
yeah, I'd agree.
I am convinced you will conquer the Finnish whiskey market. Before we finish, just a quick question. Ingvar mentioned that obviously, the world today, there's new distilleries starting every week, more or less, and they've all got absolutely minuscule little stills. Ingvar mentioned that you guys had asked Forsyth to make you little stills, and Forsyth had kind of gone, "Ooh, tiny little stills, what's this?" And then you'd sort of started this kind of craft or access to the craft market for Forsyth. Is that true? Or
yeah, well, that is true. The story goes that our owner Anssi is he wants things to be done, and he went to Scotland to buy the stills. And he went to the Forsyth and said that, well, I want this kind of stills, and well, after negotiation, they were drawing shape of stills, and actually the guy said that, well, you get double size for same money. But Anssi said, sorry, that can't be done, because well, we have a space waiting for the distillery, and well, the roof is here and floor is here, so they have to fit in our brewery, and we can't get the bigger ones. And after a little while, they said, okay, we may make you a prototype of stills. And actually, our old distilleries, Spirit and Wastil, are prototype stills from the Forsyth.
Nice.
But they were really proud for what they produced, because they were, the picture from our distillery were their category for the main picture from their brochure, and they were really proud for making those small stills. Our Spirit still is 900 liters, so quite small.
That is very small, yeah. Nice, cool. Well, Jussi, thank you very much. I very much enjoyed that. We are now going to bring on Ingvar Ronda, who I think has been hanging about in the background. You may have seen him flash up on screen a few times. Ingvar, how are you?
I'm fine, Johnny. How are you?
Good stuff. Very well, thanks. Very well. I thought at this point we'll talk about the blended malt So let me just introduce this, and then we'll have a chat between myself, Ingvar, and Moa. Berry Brothers have been buying quite a lot of casks of Nordic whiskey now. We bought from maybe 15 or so Nordic distilleries. A lot of that is new fill and it's still maturing. But we're just at a point where we've actually got enough of our own casks in Scotland maturing. And I noticed as well that we actually had a lot of nice sherry casks, which kind of made me think, well, this could work quite nicely as a blended malt. And I kind of scoured the internet and asked knowledgeable people, and it hadn't been done before. There'd been a kind of a Swedish blended malt between Smøgen and Fen, but I thought, well, why not? So I spoke to my good friend Thomas Aubon, who I believe is on the call as well. Thomas, are you there? Yes, here's Thomas Aubon. And I kind of challenged him. So on a Facebook chat, I said, here are the casks we've got. So sherry casks from Smøgen, a PX casks from Teerenpeli, so not the one we've just tasted. These are all still in wood. A PX cask from Farilochen, a PX cask from Mossgard, and then we also had a very heavily peated, sherried High Coast as well. And I said to Thomas, what percentage do you think? And I put in my own percentages, and then I vatted them, and we sent them back and forth. And I'm kind of ashamed to say Thomas's was much better than mine. So we bottled Thomas's recipe. Thomas, what do you think of this?
I love it. And I think it's a very cool way of showcasing Nordic whiskey. Because this blend is still what you've already said is characteristics for Nordic whiskey. It's big, it's flavorful, and it's a sort of bold statement of whiskey.
I think you've got just the right level of peat in the vatting as well from the High Coast and the Smøgen. And then I think you can, I sort of use things like the Smøgen and the Mossgard as kind of like top dressing, just to bring out little trebly notes. I think you can kind of pick that up as well. So I'm super proud of it, I have to say. Moa, Ingvar, what do you think of this?
I mean, first of all, what an insane challenge. Usually a blender has 250 casks to choose from. And Thomas, you got 6 casks and you have to use all of them. So kudos to Thomas for doing a bloody great whiskey. Absolutely.
Yeah, well done.
Mo, what would you think?
Oh, sorry, Ingvar, did you want to say something?
No, you go ahead, Mo.
No, I was going to say a bold statement is exactly how I would describe it. And it has this lovely foresty note that to me just tastes like the Nordics. And I think there would be a lot of, if you look at the kind of Nordic whiskey drinkers as a kind of a general sense, I think a lot of them would really enjoy this.
Absolutely. And I one of my tasting notes here was it's a comfort whiskey in the same sense that you have comfort food. This is soothing and is something you can just sink into. And what surprised me was that they're all 6 sherry casks, but the sherry flavors don't overpower the blend. Because I'm not fond of sherry monsters. Sherry should be there as one part of the whiskey. I get some nice fresh herbal green notes, Carpenter's Workshop on the nose. So extremely well balanced. Thomas, where did you learn to blend a whiskey?
I wouldn't say I know how to blend whiskey. I was lucky, and Johnny has been very good at sourcing great casks.
Well, you certainly did a great job.
Years of practice. There is one other credit to go out on this one, which is there is anyone who's a fan of Nordic whiskey may have heard of a mysterious Nordic skald that lives in the far north of Sweden, occasionally in Stockholm, called Lars Carlson. Very mysterious man, and he came up with a name for the blend, Vindőga. Vindőga means window, which is on our pack with the bottle. Berry Brothers bottle has a window on it, but Lars also thought it was quite nice because it is like a window into the Nordics. And then there's even a third meaning, which Vindőga historically in archaic Swedish apparently means wind eye. So it was kind of nautical term for the direction the wind is blowing, which, you know, I kind of think as a Scotsman, it kind of feels a bit scary when you taste all these phenomenal Nordic whiskies and you do kind of wonder which way the wind is blowing in the whiskey market. But yeah, thank you to Lars for his wordsmithery and coming up with this one. Cool. Ingvar, before we bash on with the next dram, I was kind of curious to get your view, really. So, you know, I've seen you at whiskey festivals and you are always surrounded by a little kind of orbit of whiskey nerds getting their books signed and stuff. And you're a very loquacious guy. You always chat to everyone, which is lovely. You know, when people kind of come up to you and ask about Nordic whiskey, you know, what is Nordic whiskey? How does it taste? What answer do you give?
First of all, I've noticed that a lot of people from other parts of the world are increasingly interested in Nordic whiskies as a new region, as most enthusiasts are when you have a new region challenging the big five, Scotland, Ireland, America, Canada, and Japan. It's always interesting. And now we have around 50 distilleries in the Nordics. But when the second part of that question comes, okay, so tell me, how does Nordic whiskey taste? What does it taste like? And that's the tricky part, because I don't think myself that there is a typical Nordic flavor in the whiskies coming from these distilleries, with one exception. And Hans brought it up with his first rye from Stauning. I do believe there is a typical Nordic rye style, less sweet, less spicy, more herbal, more dry. Otherwise, I think the Nordic distillers are following their own ways. I know we are ending with Smøgen, and I've always said that it's the best Scotch I've ever tasted, and I'm not sure if Per likes it when I'm saying that, but it could challenge the best on Islay any day of the moment. And then you have other whiskies from the rest of the Nordics who taste completely different. Thank God. I mean, we got rid of all this talking about regions, a typical lowland, a typical Speyside, typical Islay. They don't exist anymore. So I don't think we should try to impose that onto the Nordic whiskies and say, okay, we're looking for a Nordic style of flavor. I think that's wrong.
Yeah, I guess as a sort of, you know, with your commercial hat on, I guess it's quite helpful to be able to say, well, you know, Denmark tastes like this and Norway is like that, and kind of compare it to the regions of Scotland, because that's kind of how a lot of whiskey drinkers sort of get into it. It makes it quite accessible. Mm-hmm. But it is, yeah, it's a challenging thing to do. And, you know, I agree, part of the charm of it is that there's just amazing quality whiskies, but they're all very, very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I think that is a really nice segue into the next whiskey. So this is a distillery that, you know, as a whiskey nerd, I sometimes find it a little bit depressing that, you know, so many distilleries are owned by you know, big operators, and they're maybe not doing the most kind of independent thing. And you look at the world of wine, where there's small producers who are doing their own thing on the land and making things that are really unique and just have a sense of place. And you kind of think, God, why isn't the whiskey world like that? But there are some producers that are exactly like that. What we have next is two from Denmark, which I think it's probably impossible to pronounce two correctly if you're not from Denmark. Is that correct, Jakob?
Yeah, well, I'm not to say I think doing your best is good enough. I would always say two. I think you're pretty close in your pronunciation anyways.
I just don't want to look like I'm spitting at the camera. Let me just tell people a bit about this whiskey, and then we'd like to hear more about two, please. Sure. So this is actually quite an unusual bottling in many ways. So Jakob will tell us more in a minute, but this is some of Two's smoked distillate. So it's smoked with beechwood. Now, anyone who's also a beer nerd like myself would know that's like German Roche beer. So a very, very traditional way of smoking beer, you know, goes back hundreds of years, Roche beer. And then beyond that, this is actually what you might kind of call a multi-vintage single cask, which doesn't exactly make sense. But this was 2 quarter casks, 2 quarter casks of 2, one 2017, one 2019. And when I tasted them, they're both pretty good. As you might expect, the older 2017 had a bit more wood influence. The smoke was a little bit more tame. 2019, the smoke was pretty fierce. And as I tend to do, I tried vatting them. And actually, I thought they worked beautifully together. So Jakob kindly vatted them for us in Denmark, and they made the trip over in a refill hogshead. And they've probably had the best part of a year to marry. So I'm really happy with this one. It's a bit complex. So it's half 2017, half 2019, 2 quarter casks of the smoked make and vatted together, bottled at 57.6. So Jakob, tell us a bit about 2, please.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I'm in the middle of our tasting room. This is actually private casks from owners who invested, not only you guys, but others who loved the idea of having a cask here at the distillery. So we're in the place closest to our hearts. This is our family farm for now 8 generations, and I'm part of that with my wife Marie, and also my brother-in-law and sister-in-law Ellen and Andreas. So we're kind of the team now for the family. We did a change in ownership of the farm during the last couple of years and build up this whole distillery from where it all started. And I think we're actually going to end up with the whiskey, actually, because that's one of our, I think, this barrel or these 2 quarter casks we chose to bottle are very characteristic for some of the very local inspirations we've put into our whiskeys. But it all started out in 2010 at a very small scale. I think I feel it's almost like our story when I hear Jussi or I hear Hans talk about Stauning. That it was actually for us from 2010 and I think until 2015. I would not call us a distillery. I don't think anyone even knew we were making whiskey before 2014 when the first bottle was actually released. We told no one, and I have to pay a lot of tribute to my father-in-law Nikolai, who was also part of it. Unfortunately, he passed away earlier this year, but he took the first big steps in actually filling the first casks. And the basic idea of for us and for our family was trying to explore whether using the crops we could grow at our land here at our family farm, if that would turn into something unique or just a good whiskey. We had no direct ideas about how that would turn out. We were more curious from being grain nerds and farmers for generations than we were actually knowing about how to make whiskey at all. So we came from a very strange vantage point into making whiskey, I think. But we discussed this a lot in the family, and we thought it was a great idea to figure out if we could do this. And you have to imagine this place. This is a farm. We have 500 hectares of land. That's quite a lot. We grow it all organically. We have the 200 dairy cows grazing the fields, and there's this symbiosis between growing good grains organically and also having some animals at the farm. So this was the place, we worked on and discussed whether we would build something on top of that for our generation. And this idea just caught up, and we tried doing these experiments. And I think in 2015, our thoughts were ripe enough to actually make the decision to build up a full distillery around this, all these great whiskey experiments that we've done. So the first couple of years, I think we did like 16, 18 cask experiments of different sizes. And then we put it into a bit of a more structure of doing a certain amount. I think, was it Hans mentioning something like 6,000 liters in a year or something like that? And then it was in 2019, we actually completed the whole building of our distillery. And just to do the short version of what we decided on doing, when we moved here back to Thy in our generation, we had this idea that if we were going to do this, we wanted to do everything from scratch. So we would grow the grains, we'd have to clean and sort the grains and try out different varieties of barley and different varieties of grains for making whiskey. We would want our own malt house. So we built this, I don't know if you have a picture there, but we have this drum malting system that we worked fiercely to invent because we tried to figure out like who would actually be able, I think the second picture, I don't know if you can take that.
Picture number 2.
If you could do that. So there's, we worked fiercely on how to just put up this malt house. And we decided on this drum malting system. So we would be able to really control the whole process of malting and keep good control of the atmosphere, smoking in those drums and so on. So no one was able to deliver this. So we caught up with a local construction company and a local engineer to do some automation, and we ended up building this thing. And also to make sure it was something we could finance, we talked with local breweries and other distillers in Denmark and asking, if we did this, we could do a one batch from one small field and keep it traceable all the way to the bottle. And we would love to help you out as well if you're interested in this. So we built this bigger than our own production, and we also do malts now for other Danish distillers and some abroad, but also breweries, of course, and even bakeries who get some malts out of our malt house because we have more capacity than we're using currently for our whiskey. So this is.
Were you always growing heritage grains on the farm, or is that something that you've kind of moved into now that you're kind of making the end product as well?
No. So we have a long tradition for this, and I think the picture now has been the picture for the last 20, 30 years. When you do organic farming, you have to change the crops every year. That's part of the whole process of keeping control of wheat and keeping a good quality in the grains. So we grow rye, we grow spelt, we grow 4 different kinds of barley this year, wheat, a local variety of wheat this year also. So we have a lot of experiments in the fields, oats as well. And so we change the crops every year. So there's a lot of things we do in the fields. And that's been the inspiration for our whiskey, to try out these different types of grains. We work a lot with the I'm not sure we don't call it terroir that much, as we call it like what's just outside our door.
Jakob, could I just say, because you're talking about terroir, I absolutely love 2 sentences on your website. Tea whiskey is tied to this place. You should be able to taste the soil and the barley and every drop of the whiskey.
Exactly.
No one could put it more elegantly than that. And to me, it's terroir, even though terroir is a wine thing. But you're well aware, as most of us who are listening now, that this discussion about terroir and whiskey has been going on for 10, 15 years, and some are convinced, others are not. Are you yourself, Jakob, convinced that you will, I'm sure you are because you wrote this on the website, that you can actually taste the local crop and depending on what soil it grew in? Are you convinced that you're able to do that?
Well, 100%. I'm very convinced. But again, I think there's a lack of really hardcore information on growing in different soils and how that interacts with whiskey. But I'll give you one example that's very clear for me, at least. So what we did in the very beginning, we went to what we call the Nordic Gene Bank, which is basically a deep freezer where you keep old varieties of grains that's been grown for centuries. So as an example, one called Imperial Malt has been grown in Denmark in the 1910s and 20s. Then it was discarded because you had newer varieties. So we took that out alongside other varieties, just a handful, that's what you get. You defreeze it and you sow it again. And of course, the first years it's harvesting by scissors, and then you move up from that to a corner of a field and the bigger part of the field. And it's a big work. It takes maybe 7 or 8 years before we even had enough to do the small 5-ton batch that we malt for making whiskey. And before that, some smaller experiments, obviously. But this malt that we get out of these old barley strains, it gives us a very, very different character in our new makes. It gets more citrusy, a bit more grassy, almost like funky flavors coming in, which I'm pretty sure is we malted, try to do it in the exact same way, and we have a lot of control in our malt house. So I'm very sure this is due to the barley strain, for example.
Are you sometimes afraid that when you put that much attention into what you're growing in the fields, that much attention into the new make, that you will mess it all up during maturation because you choose the wrong cask and they will somehow overpower that beautiful new make that you put so much work into?
So I'm actually I see it a bit differently because I think it turns out it stays in there even if we even if we use different, also quite traditional types of casks for our whiskies, so I actually think sometimes for a whiskey lover, a whiskey drinker, you would actually experience the differences more if you get like a traditional sherry cask or traditional bourbon cask for your whiskey, and then add just this one thing that's different, just the barley. And then you'll find out exactly what the barley does, because you're kind of used to some of the other flavors, but you still feel this is unique. This is somehow different than what I've tasted before. So I think it differently. That like we're not going into like it's barley for us, it's grains for us. That's what has to be local. That's our inspiration. So we actually use more traditional casks and love the sherry cask and bourbon casks, like this whiskey that we have in our glass. And I also think like for going back to this whiskey, and I think that's quite interesting. When we started smoking our whiskeys, we knew we would love to do that as well. And of course, we discussed getting peat or peated malt and doing, because that's tradition in Scottish whiskey at least. But then we figured out, what's really local, what's really Danish, and I think, Johnny, you mentioned Rauchbier from Germany, and you're right, that's a tradition. But I think here in Denmark, the tradition is when we do Danish bacon, or we do smoked salmon, or we do cheese that's smoked, or whatever it is, it's always beechwood smoke. So we thought, let's try it out. Maybe we'll do liquid bacon, I'm not sure, but let's try it out, see how that works. But I think it works beautifully, and it's actually, at least in our processes, we get this really elegant. It's still smoky, but it's much more like meaty, rich, savory smoke than it is medicinal, sharp smoke flavors. And I'm
super curious to see how this matures. I think in 15, 20 years, that kind of smoke, you generally see smoke character, something I think that matures very, very differently over the years. And I think this will show amazingly in 15, 20 years. So I'm going to ensure there's some casks tucked in Berry Brothers warehouses right at the back that no one can get to.
But I think one of the first times we kind of tucked, making whiskey was something we did, in the old horse stables. There was a room for some casks, and we kind of kept them. Didn't know if we were going to serve them to anyone else. But when we finally, experience this whiskey maturing slowly, we of course bottled some of it, and one of the whiskeys, I think the first time we really got this amazing reception from the Whiskey Bible, Jim Murray writing that, was actually this beechwood smoked whiskey, named the best European whiskey or something like that, and that would be, that's amazing getting feedback like that for not just the whiskey that resembles something from Scotland, like, oh, that's a really good Danish version of something we tried before, but instead something that's quite uniquely tied to this place. If it's the heritage varieties or if it's the Danish smoke, and I just enjoy, trying to explore that very much.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I'm a huge fan, and got some lovely comments coming in as well. The man who writes Words of Whiskey, whose name I cannot pronounce, says it is wonderfully weird and unique, probably my favorite of the night, which is a nice way to put it. 'Cause, I mean, it is quite an unusual whiskey. There's not many things you would compare that to. And actually, in my tasting notes, I think I wrote, it's almost akin to like aged mezcal, and there's kind of notes of like cedar coming through there as well. But it's certainly, it's not like it's woody. It's that kind of beach smoke character coming through, which is just, it's unique, but it's wonderful.
I think it's really elegant. I mean, it's a beautiful aperitif.
Well, I'm super grateful for you telling us this cask, Jakob, and it's one I look forward to revisiting in years to come as well. I think we'll move on to the next whiskey. Jakob, thank you very much. If you wouldn't mind hanging about till the end as well, please. Hopefully we'll have a few questions at the end. Ingvar, you enjoyed that one?
Oh, very much so. Absolutely. Unusual, as you said, but extremely elegant. And I love that touch of beech smoke. And as Jakob said, not medicinal. Totally different type of smokiness.
I agree. So the next speaker almost needs no introduction. If I said he's a man who lives a split life, and half the time he's a kind of upstanding member of society, and the other half of the time he's a sort of dark knight, and he lives in Gotham City. Sorry, Gothenburg. It is obviously the inimitable Per Coldenby of Smøgen. Per, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good. I like that little Gotham City joke. I was quite proud of that.
Well, sorry, I've put my bat costume in the closet.
No, I'm very glad of that. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Let me just tell everyone about this this Smøgen. Smøgen. This is a Smøgen. It's a 2012 Smøgen, which must be quite unusual for you to have the oldest dram in a tasting, is it?
Yeah. Can't remember when that happened.
So it's a 2012 Smøgen. It's bottled at 59.6, and it's an Oloroso hogshead, and it is quite clearly the peated make. I don't do a lot of unpeated, I guess, but Per, tell us a bit about Smøgen.
Well, actually, Smøgen is based on heavily peated malt only. I do have other experiments that I've made as well, but they've not been released as yet. So any Smøgen you can get a hold of now is based on heavily peated malt. And that malt was and is still taken from Scotland because there was no professional maltster actually making peated malt in Sweden at the time when we started in 2010. So was Scotland. If you wanted to make a smoky or peaty whiskey, you had to get it from Scotland or Belgium, because in Belgium they make all sorts of strange beers, and obviously they have all sorts of malt as well. But Smøgen is very small. I heard Teerenpeli said that their 900-liter spirit still is small and dinky. Ours is 600 liters, so it's much smaller. But that's basically the calculation that I had to make, because I didn't want to take any loans actually to start off. Was what can we afford? And that sort of decided the size of the stills. So a 900-liter wash still and a 600-liter spirit still. And that's one of Johnny's photos. And it's all been sort of cramped into a fairly small room, the whole distillery from mashing through to distillation, and never mind the gin still, which is standing in the way of the whiskey production here in the middle of the picture. And then we sourced everything secondhand that we could, and basically constructed it ourselves, mainly myself and a few more shareholders. Here we are. We apparently managed to make something good enough to produce an excellent spirit. And what I wanted to make, having been interested in whiskey now for well over 30 years, was obviously a high quality whiskey, but also whiskey that has a very strong and clear character. Strength of character is important in itself. You obviously have to stand out, but you also have to have a bit of an attitude to sort of punch through. You can never make a whiskey that everyone will love, but if you can make the people who love it even more, then that's what I'm after.
I think one of the main characteristics of Smøgen is the weight, and I would really recommend anyone, if you've got a sample like Glenmorangie 10 at home, stick your finger in there, and then just kind of like rub your fingers and feel how thick that whiskey is, and then get something like Smøgen, and I think the same can be said of like Farilocker in Denmark as well. Stick your finger in there, rub it. It's just, it is like it's more like olive oil than whiskey. What part of your process do you kind of put down to that weight?
The new make that I make is quite oily, definitely, and especially now, since 2.5 years, I've started using actual floor malted Swedish malt, which is peated with Swedish peat as well, and the weight of that is even more intense. But any Smøgen will be quite oily and rich, and that gives a very good depth of flavor. It's like a bit of a bass note or a bass drum or something. You've got this big sort of resonance from that depth. And I would say, obviously, the barley strain, the malting process, and certainly the peat source can all impact the character of the whiskey. But I'd say that the fact that gives me that weight, and I don't know this, but it's just my hunch from having made it now for 12 years, is that it's actually the mashing process, because I use only 2 waters, and I don't sparge, so I don't save the 3rd or 4th water for the 1st water in the subsequent batch or mash. So 2 waters and a low temperature. So I don't go over 71 or 72 degrees, which means that I get all the lovely malty, biscuity notes from the core of the malt, of the grain. I get quite a lot less of the polyphenols, the grassy notes from the husks. I also lose quite a lot of the peat, which is obviously encasing the husks. But I mean, with heavily peated barley, you've still got 50 plus ppm phenols, so you get plenty. But I'd say the mashing process, and then also the very long ferment, so 6 to 7 days. And to put that into perspective, you only need 2 days, 48 hours to ferment out the alcohol, because I'm using a distiller's yeast. So leaving that for 4 to 5 extra days means that you get a really massive secondary fermentation, lactic acid, bacteria, etc., and borderline funky. Actually, if you like Hamden rum, you know what funky is. It's not that extreme, like, but oh yeah, who doesn't? It's not that extreme, but it's sort of going into that direction.
I've got some lovely comments coming through. Klaus says Smøgen is a gem, and he doesn't miss opportunity to try an expression, which I think I feel the same. Distilled Connors says it's kind of like a complex Bunnahabhain in a good way, which I kind of agree with. I think it's quite it really cuts through the sherry, but the sherry's still pretty aggressive.
Ingvar, with this one, pardon, the mention of Bunnahabhain is funny because our wash still is actually modeled on the Bunnahabhain and Lagavulin, quite unusual pear-shaped model. So it's a very miniature type of Bunnahabhain design.
And yours is slightly cleaner, I think, though.
Not much, actually. I'm working on it. Bunnahabhain has 100 years advantage or something on me. So,
100 years of grime, yeah.
Yeah.
Ingvar, what do you think of this Smøgen?
Well, it's no secret. I've always been a huge fan of Smøgen and what Per is doing. So I would like to hear what Per says when I compare his Smøgen single malt to the very, very best from Islay. Is that an insult, or does that make you proud, or you don't care? I'm betting on the third alternative.
I certainly would care. I mean, everyone in the industry knows that it's much more expensive to make whiskey on an island, including Islay, and that means that the Islay whiskies have to be that little bit better and more strong in their character in order to actually survive in the blenders market. Because let's not forget that quite a substantial volume, even of Islay malts, is destined for blending. And if it wasn't very good, it wouldn't be there. So it's a nice comment.
Thanks. I was thinking, because you mainly rely on small batch and single casks, and you're a small distillery. Do you see in the future that you will have any kind of core bottling with larger volumes?
Well, I really can't do large volumes. Our vatting tank is 2,300 something liters. And given half-liter bottles, that's a bit over 4,000 bottles per batch. That's it. Period. Obviously, you could exchange the equipment, but there is actually, I mean, not every single cask is destined to be able to be a single cask, but just about every cask can be used in a small batch to great effect, as long as you know how to combine them. And there is reason to keep it at quite a limited batch size, just to get the advantage of that strength of character. Because if you vat 200, 300, 400 casks, you will always narrow down to become sort of center of field for that distillery. But with a very small batch, you can always use idiosyncrasies from different casks to great effect. And our first 10-year-old, which was called Dante after my former dog, a bloodhound, that was 4 ex-Sauterne casks, but they were all 4 quite different due to the toasting level of the casks, and also to the type of peated barley that I had, peated malt, sorry, that I had used, which was actually from Belgium in that case, and that was a light to medium level. And the casks were so different that I actually first used, I mean, by the bucket, literally, from those casks to make a special Jubilee bottling for our 8-year-old anniversary. And then the rest that was in the casks, which means that they were uneven in their volume, was used for the first 10-year-old. And it was just so different to any of the 4 casks used, the combination of them. So, I mean, it's in the blending lab, sure, but the blending room or bottling hall, you can actually do some quite interesting things if you've got a limited volume to work with. So I actually want to keep it quite small, because I'm after quality and strength of character.
Yeah. I think that's one thing I enjoyed. So I was lucky enough to visit Smøgen earlier this year, and just sort of clambering about the warehouses. There's so many different casks, and they're all just, it was nice to see you just get really excited with basically every single cask of, oh, here's something I tried, this a bit different, and here's this a bit different. And I guess that's kind of the beauty of a small distillery, where you don't have to worry about a batch 10-year-old, is you can just kind of keep, producing fun things.
Yeah. That said, I've actually got to sort of core range now. Smøgen 90 proof, which is 3 bourbon barrels at the time. So that's very small batch, which is a 9-year-old. and 90 degrees proof is 51.4%. By the way.
Okay, Par, we're trying to sell the Berry Brothers bottling tonight. Thanks
Yeah,
very much.
I know, but I mean that's sort of telling you what I'm about. I want strength of character, and sure, any batch can differ from the next one or the subsequent one. That's fine, and certainly, I mean, taking that to the extreme is selecting those that can actually be bottled as single casks, just like the one we're having here now, which is also a 9-year-old, but from a sherry cask, so quite different.
It's a really phenomenal cask, this, and I'm aware you were sort of loath to let it go to Berry Brothers, but I'm very glad you did.
Yeah.
And I was also a bit sad to see Serge gave it a better score than your official bottling. So I'm sorry, you should have kept it. But anyway, it's too late now. We bottled it. You're not having it back. There is also a little bit of this one. So this is the only one that we've bottled that is also in the blend as well. So there's a little bit of this Smøgen in that blend, and the other constituents of the blend are all yet to be bottled. But I think you can kind of feel that coming through the blend as well. You know, that kind of like bacony smoke at the back.
I mean, it is on the palate in particular, and perhaps even more on the finish. Come to think of it, Smøgen is quite intense, and you usually don't get that much peat on the nose. You get more on the palate, but then with that oily spirit backing it up, you get a very long finish, and that means that in a vatting or a blend, it would probably tend to dominate towards the death. And sure, you can feel clear notes of Smøgen in there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Par. I think we're going to bring everyone else back on screen now, and hopefully some of the lovely people watching will have some questions. Moa, Ingvar, would you like to kick us off with any questions in the drams tonight, or sort of questions in the Nordics more generally?
Moa, you go.
Oh, I'm trying to think. I saw that there was a few questions that popped up in the chat earlier, so I was just actually having a look at those.
I can start with one question. We've seen now around the world that the whiskey distillers in Australia, they are starting to gather together to market Australian whiskies. We see it in Brittany with a technical file of how to make single malts there. We see it in America. We've had it in Scotland for many years. So do you four guys think that there would be any benefits for Nordic whiskies, either to decide that how should we produce a Nordic whiskey, or if you don't want to go that far, are there any collaborations you could do, or could you work together in the marketing of Nordic whiskies, or would you rather prefer to walk your own path and see how it goes?
Well, can I answer that question,
sure.
Or do you want to start? I'll give my answer at least. Thanks. So I just one thought that, I think Moa was very correct in the beginning, saying that, people kind of started up with everything that, they had or what they could get their hands on, or a budget of 1,500 euros or whatever the story is. And we kind of ended up doing things very differently. So the question of saying, like, is there one way to produce Nordic whiskey? I think is in my idea, that would strangle all the creativity and innovation in this region. And I think Scottish whiskey being, I don't know how many 100 years old now, maybe it was even more diverse once. I have no idea, but it's so many years since that. So I think for us, this is all about experimenting. Maybe it takes generations before we stop doing that, and hopefully never. So let's not decide on one way to make it. We even just do one distillation for our whiskey in our strange distilling setup, and that's very unfamiliar to anything else. But doing collaborations and trying to explain about the region and how we take pride and inspiration to the geography and our whatever, here's the feeling or the locality of the smoke or whatever it is, that would be great, I think. And I would always love to do that. And I think doing what we're doing right now today, and Berry Brothers taking interest into making or combining Nordic whiskies, doing a blend or just explaining about the region and what's happening, I think that's really great. So I love that idea, and I we'd love to work in that direction.
Hans, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we are working on some common values for Nordic and Danish distilleries, and it's not they're actually more liberal than Scottish. We allow more ways to make whiskey because we think it's a value for us to, as Jakob is mentioning, that the Nordic region and Danish region could be more innovative, that could be the thing that is common for us, is that we are that innovation and creativity is and also the transparency and sustainability is some of the things we agree upon in the Nordics and in Denmark.
Yeah, I also agree for the guys. It's something richness that we can share ideas and help each other for making better whiskey. Still, we all do our own thing, and I think this Nordic whiskey region is something also in our founder Ans's idea, and he's really keen on this kind of thing.
What do you say?
We actually tried this, I think it was 6-7 years ago in Sweden. I drafted a set of code of conduct for this, and it all ended up in not being adopted for different reasons. But one being that we had slightly differing goals and paths of getting to said goals. And I think that if you were to expand Sweden to all of the Nordics, that issue would simply triple or quadruple in complexity. So I think that might be difficult. But I mean, the one common denominator among Nordic whiskies, that at least those that I have tasted, is that there's quite a strong character to them, and everyone is quite the enthusiast of pushing both their own products and also the fact that it's Nordic. So I think that, I mean, the common denominator would be strength of character and not making whiskey for the mass market.
I guess it seems that all four of you agree that it would be smart to do something to promote the term Nordic whiskies, not in the sense of how does a Nordic whiskey taste, because they're so different, how should we produce? No, you go your own way. But to do that kind of collaboration, would that be mainly to reach the export market? Because as we all know, it's so difficult for new distilleries outside the 5 big countries to make an impact in a wide world totally dominated by Scotch, Irish, and bourbon, etc. So would this make it easier for you to do something on the export market, do you think?
If I can just take the stick here, and I mean, someone mentioned earlier on that I think it might have been Moa that mentioned her father being suspicious about Swedish whiskies, and I mean, we do have some issues to get over or through on our home markets as well, and I'm sure that Norway, Denmark, Finland would have slightly different problems or issues than Sweden. But I mean, we're not that well established as far as market penetration goes in our own countries. So I mean, it would be a huge benefit on our home markets as well, but certainly for export. Yeah, sure.
I mean, I guess that's a question. You know, I asked the same question last year to other distillers, but you know, being honest, is it helpful for the outside world to talk about Nordic whiskey? Because you know, we're as a Brit, we kind of look at the Nordics as quite a like secure region, and you're all pals. But actually, you know, historically, you've fought between yourselves as much as Scotland and England have, for instance. And if someone would talk about British whiskey, I wouldn't really like that. So, I mean, would you rather talk about Swedish whiskey, Danish whiskey, Finnish whiskey? Jakob, Hans, what are your thoughts on that?
I think it becomes very, for example, when we submit whiskies into award shows like World Whiskies Awards, it would be beneficial to have a sixth category that is not world whiskey, but more. It would make sense to have Nordic whiskey as a category. Right now we have Swedish, we have Norwegian, we have Finnish, we have Icelandic, we have Faroe. There's so many of Scandinavian and Nordic countries that are still not combined into one unit, and I think it would be stronger to combine them into one unit, and that could match Scottish whiskey and American whiskey and Canadian whiskey and Irish whiskey and Japanese whiskey, the traditional whiskey making countries, and not be in the world whiskey category. I think for Nordics it would definitely make sense to separate.
I think that would make a lot of sense. I have been a judge for the World Whiskey Awards for the past 2 years. And judging world whiskey is always difficult because there are so many different categories within that category. And from my point of view, at least, the Nordic countries seems to have quite a similar character and approach to whiskey. So that's a really interesting thing to think about, absolutely, for moving forwards.
Yeah, and I think,
are you just a proud Dane? Do you want to just for Denmark to conquer the world, or are you happy for the Nordics to do so?
Well, I think there's some things will catch us up by itself. Hans distillery Stauning whiskey is I think 1.5 hours from us. Also at the west coast, we have this geographical commonness, the west wind at the North Sea, and a landscape that's common, and a place for tourists to visit to get a experience with rough nature, at least rough in a Danish sense. So we have some kind of, if people go one place, they can go to the other place as well. And that's, I think, the local regionality of that is working out. And I think also for describing just the geography, like what you can actually find whiskey in the Nordics. You have different areas you can go to. I mean, that's one, I think, that's one side of a region. But as I said, I would love the idea of cooperating not just in Denmark but also across the Nordic countries. And I think some of the things Per said about trying to be very honest about bottling single casks, or maybe 3 or 4 or 5, sounds a lot like what we're doing at a very small scale. So we have maybe some basic common ideas, not making the same whiskey, but we have some ideas about making whiskey. So I think there's a lot of things that might we might have in common with Per, or someone else has in common across the borders, that makes sense maybe in presenting the whiskey. So I think there would be a lot to work with. We are very open to doing that. I think we would love doing that. And for anyone else, like you say, Johnny, looking at it from the UK, Nordics is like a thing. If you're an American, people don't exactly know where Denmark is compared to.
But you make great furniture.
What's the capital, right? Or yeah, exactly, great furniture, something like that. And it's also Danish is something you eat. So it's the further away you get, the more diffuse is the concept about every single country. So I think that there would be something to work with here. But like Per said, the differences are so big that it's not about defining one thing or saying we're all alike. Maybe it's more about transparency, being open, using what's local, being inspired, and innovating what whiskey can be in a Nordic context.
Can Scotland join the Nordics? I mean, we are quite far north.
You're welcome.
Can we not Scotland, just Orkney.
Orkney is welcome, yeah.
And Shetland.
Yeah, well, Serge did ask that. I think, yeah, Serge suggested we could do a Highland Park in this series, but I'm not sure. We have one thing I've been enjoying using is our ex Kiro casks I've sent across to people to fill. So we've got a Highland Park filled into Kiro, and I've sent some Kiro to Mosgard as well. So we've got some Mosgard maturing in Kiro casks. It's quite nice to, I think, sort of move these things about the Nordics. Mo, I think you had a question.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask what markets outside the Nordics that each of your whiskies do particularly well in, or if there's any disadvantage to being based in the Nordics. I know at the moment, with everything that's going on over here, it's a bit hard maybe to set up export markets to the UK, but we've also seen an increase here of, in particular, Swedish whiskey and Danish whiskey. So I'd love to hear more of that.
Yeah, for our part, I can say that we are very strong in Germany, and I think it has to do with the region where we are on the west coast of Denmark. It's besides being rural and a farmland, it's also a tourist area. So we have a lot of, especially Germans, coming to our part of Denmark, and many of them visit Stauning and have a very good experience. They see how whiskey is made from scratch, from every process in whiskey making, from floor malting to everything, and they bring bottles and stories back to Germany and spread the word basically. So Germany has been very good for us, and it's slowly spreading from there.
Cool.
You see, where's Teerenpeli's big market?
I think, well, also in Germany, Sweden is one of big where we import. Of course, we are importing to Japan and the United States also, but small batches. But I think mainly biggest one are Sweden and Germany.
How about Taiwan? Is anyone in Taiwan? I've certainly noticed. Maybe it's just Ho Chang sort of upweights online conversation, but I see a bit of chat from Taiwanese whiskey drinkers about Nordic whiskey as well.
We're actually present. Smøgen is in Taiwan. I'd say that Germany, as everyone else, it's a large market, and they like good, characterful whiskey or spirits. Germany, UK, and Taiwan would be our major export markets.
Nice, cool. Okay, well, I think I'm not seeing any more questions coming in on the chat. So I guess I'll wrap up. What I'd like to say is thank you so much to everyone. Firstly, for your time this evening. Ingvar, Moa as well for joining us, but all the distillers, certainly thank you so much for joining us, and thank you as well for being willing and open to sell Berry Brothers these wonderful casks. I was just kind of going back and nosing them as we went on the tasting, and they've all opened up wonderfully, and they're just also different whiskies, but all that character just exuding from the glasses. So a massive thank you to everyone. Thank you for everyone who's watching as well. Again, please do consider buying a bottle. bbr.com, Abbey Whiskey at the moment, but I've seen a few questions. There are bottles going to Kirsch in Germany. There are bottles going to Clydesdale in Sweden as well, so they'll be accessible in those markets, as well as some other UK retailers in the future. But cool. So that's it. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alex, if you can click no longer live, that'd be great, please.